Well, it's Lent. We're only a few weeks away from Easter now, so I thought it would be a good time to check in with our gal in Rome. Technically, she's Daily Wire's gal, but we're borrowing her. She's Bree Dail, the Rome correspondent for Daily Wire, and there's stuff going on with the Vatican, so let's check in. Bree, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me back.
First of all, most important thing, see, here in America, we've got various bishops and archbishops giving us dispensation this Friday for St. Patrick's Day. We can have corned beef. How's that Bishop of Rome treating you? Are you going to have to go with fish this Friday?
Fish this Friday. I've not seen any dispensation here with the Italians.
See, they're not a big Irish-Italian community, let's face it. That's okay. I think you'll suffer along with the seared bronzino. I think you'll be fine. That said, the Bishop of Rome is making headlines for some other more significant things. He gave an interview. Now, Bree, I don't know about you, but whenever I see an AP headline that says, Pope Francis says in interview, I just hold my breath. It's like, oh God, what has he done now? That resurrection thing was all made up. Who knows? I mean, this guy will say anything in an interview. But in this case, he reiterated the church's stance on the transgender issue. What specifically did he say, and why is it significant that he's reiterating this dogma?
Well, Pope Francis gave this exclusive to Elisabetta Piqué for an Argentine outlet called... honestly, like when it comes to this type of thing, especially when it comes to speaking to the Spanish community, we end up seeing a lot of times misinterpretations. But in this case, we don't actually. Pope Francis has continuously said that transgenderism, the ideology itself, is dangerous. He has said this in 2016. He's repeated it here. And he goes on to say it takes away from the differences that should be celebrated between the sexes, female and male. So he reiterates to the Catholic Church's teaching that there are only two biological genders.
Yeah. And by the way, oftentimes Pope Francis spends a lot of time, as he should, reiterating the dignity of every human being made in God's image. And by the way, Jesus did this too. Jesus didn't forgive, Jesus forgave. But Jesus didn't overlook the sins of the sinners around him, the tax collectors, the prostitutes. But he also said each of them were creations in God's image and they deserved human dignity. That was a radical idea then. And so when Pope Francis says, yes, this is, in fact, I want to say it, gender ideology is one of the most dangerous ideological colonizations because it blurs the difference between men and women. He's talking about the ideology. Of course, each individual who is struggling with this deserves respect and love and care and charity. That said, I hate to say it, but this is actually somewhat surprising that he's reiterating this policy because of the trend in the church right now with the German synod.
Right, and I was going to say when it comes to this, it comes on the heel of a vote by the German bishops on Friday that we're still waiting to hear from the Vatican in response to this. We do expect a response from the Vatican, but the German bishops voted. I believe it was around 38 of them out of the 58 German bishops voted to bless same-sex unions. Now, this is in direct opposition to what Pope Francis himself has taught, what the Vatican has reiterated in 2020. They came out with a document reiterating the fact that the Catholic Church will not and cannot bless same-sex unions and other civil unions that are irregular. And they have consistently been driving home this point, especially towards the German bishops. Now, at the beginning of this past month, the German bishops the leader of the German bishops said, look, we're going to continue on with our attempt to try to push this ideological narrative along. And we have listened to the Vatican, and we're going to continue on listening to our people in the spirit of synodality, despite the fact that the Pope has said stop and the Vatican has said stop. So it is interesting that this interview comes on the heel of that, but we do expect the Pope to come out and actually formally state something. He has done this in the past. In 2019, he directly addressed the German bishops and the German people when they were pushing this type of ideology.
Can you explain to people the difference between blessing a same-sex union versus actually performing the sacrament of marriage between a same-sex couple?
Well, the sacrament of marriage is between a man and a woman. That is something that is instituted by Christ to give grace. That is accordance with the church teaching. The Catholic Church will never perform a same-sex marriage per se, because it's in direct opposition to the foundation of the sacrament of marriage.
And if I can jump in here, is that because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, how can the bishops even do this? This is the loophole they're looking for. It's like, no, we're not redefining marriage and we're not messing with the sacrament, but we just want priests to be able to bless these unions, right? That's sort of what they're trying to get away with.
And the Pope Francis, through the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, made this very clear in 2020 when they issued this document specifically on blessing same-sex unions. This was promoted and supported by Pope Francis when it was published. And it definitively says we cannot bless things that are in sin. We cannot bless sin.
Right.
And according to the church, the sacrament of marriage is sacred. It is a sacrament, and we cannot then bless civil unions, period. Whether it's divorced couple who remarry outside the church or those who are in irregular unions such as same-sex unions.
And
so the church has made it very clear.
There's no need for him to come out with any infallible teaching on this, because the infallible teaching already exists, right? All he needs to do is reiterate the existing. So where does this lead? Because here you've got bishops who are going against the infallible teaching of the church. They've already been warned by the Bishop of Rome not to do this, that they can't do it. They went ahead and did it anyway. Will he start removing people from their positions as bishops? Or do we have a schism ahead of us here? I know it seems weird that German priests would, be at odds with the Catholic Church. That's never happened before.
Right. And one of the things that I tried to bring up and we brought up before the segment was a good example of this could be looking back at Henry VIII and what occurred with the bishops of England over the marriage and the dissolution of marriage for Henry VIII. The bishops in England sided with Henry VIII and split from Rome. When they split from Rome, that caused a schism. And what we're seeing now is, according to what I spoke with Cardinal Mueller over the weekend, asking him whether or not he believed that this was before the news really spread that the Germans had voted on this, whether or not the German church was already in material schism. And he had said that he believed that they were. And he has said this on record many times. But we have something called material, i.e. the foundation, the thing itself. Is it in error? Yes. Formal schism is when you say, I formally renounce the church, or you do an act that is, again, with full knowledge, that is against the church teaching. So in this case, with this vote, there's a question now to whether or not the German bishops who voted have placed themselves in formal schism.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they basically put their names up to a vote that puts them at odds with the Catholic teaching. I would, especially as they're bishops. I mean, they're part of the gig is to enforce the church's teaching. Speaking of bishops, last time we spoke, we talked about the horrific, tragic murder of an auxiliary bishop in the Los Angeles Archdiocese. I think the largest archdiocese, one of the largest in the world, certainly the largest here in America. It took Pope Francis quite a bit of time to actually speak out against his brother bishop, didn't it?
13 days, in fact, yes. And I did a report for Daily Wire on this, where I interviewed Bishop Barron, who was a very dear friend of his. Yeah. And, it was a shock for the bishops, and I'm sure it was a shock for the Vatican. The Vatican is a city-state that tends to be quite slow in its responses. So we do expect for the Pope to come out on such matters as what's gone on in Germany in a slower pace as well. They want to be discerning. And I think that was the case as well with this bishop. They wanted all the facts before they came out.
What's there to discern? Bishop got murdered. At the very least, you put something out there. All right, Bree Dail. Sadly, as is typical with Pope Francis, we get some good news from the Pope and then we get some challenging news from him. But in the long run, as far as strict adherence to Catholic teaching on faith and morals and the transgender issue, he's on the right side of the conversation today. Thanks for joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight.